Today we are covering the UK Equality Act, okay? And what I would say is it's going to be extremely relevant for those of you in the UK. However, if you're not in the UK, a lot of the things which are in our Equality Act are also in other countries, particularly Western countries. So do take that into consideration when you're watching this, that there are going to be elements that may not be relevant. So if there's anything that you're like, that's really useful, make sure you do an extra bit of research to make sure it applies to your situation. I'm Nat, everyone, and I am the head of community at Exceptional Individuals. A lot of you know this by now, but if you do not, we're an employment support agency based in London, UK, and we support anything from dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, and ADHD from working age and upwards. There's so many organisations that support neurodiversity in adolescence, but not so much in adulthood. And this is where we kick in, supporting you either get your foot in the door and get a job, or if you're already in work, getting the support that you need to be the best that you possibly can be. Now, know your rights. This is the first in a two-part series. The next one is in 2 weeks' time, and I'll give more information at the end. And this is just going over the Equality Act 2010. And just to stress, this is a UK act, but there are a lot of similar acts in other countries, particularly Western countries. And before we go any further, I want to make something crystal clear. Disclaimer. Let's do the old disclaimer so no one can sue us. The information contained in this presentation is provided for information purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice on any subject matter. You should not act or refrain from acting on the basis of any content included in this site without seeking legal or other professional advice. We disclaim all liability for actions you take or fail to take based on any content from this presentation. I have to do this because I am not a lawyer, I'm not legally trained, I'm a neurodiversity advocate, I have read the Equality Act multiple times. Everything that I'm going to say today, I've done my absolute best to make sure it is correct, but do not act on the base of this knowledge. Use this as a starting point. Okay, now we got that out of the way, and I assume everyone who sticks around after today has agreed. Disability and the law. At no point do we want to get the law involved, but let's face it, it's good to know your rights. It's good to know where you stand. And it's been, we've been on a bit of a journey with neurodiversity from not being recognised to being in multiple reports. And there's going to be some things today which probably surprise you. They definitely surprised me of what counts and what doesn't count. So first of all, do you consider yourself disabled? And this, I'm mainly asking those who resonate with being neurodiverse, whether autistic, dyslexic, etc. Do you consider yourself to be disabled? This question we ask quite a lot, but it's never been more important than it has today for what we're about to speak about. Okay, so we've got a mixture. Yes, no. And why do I ask this? Do you need to be disabled to be covered under the Equality Act? Obviously, there's different protective characteristics like sexuality, race, religion, like maternity, and we're focusing on disability today. Now, the short answer is no, you do not have to. But the longer answer is you kind of yes. And we will get into that a little bit more about why it is beneficial to consider yourself disabled if you're neurodiverse. And please remember, we're coming from the legal side here. This isn't what we personally feel. We see neurodiversity as a mixed bag. There's both strengths and challenges. But on this side, we're going for the disability. So officially, which neurodiverse condition is defined as a disability under the Equality Act 2010? So in UK law, dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD, or none of them, which ones do you think? April says, I have autism. When I was younger, I used to not like being called disabled, but as I got older, I learned that autism is a hidden disability. And I'm torn about the disability. All I'm going to say today is what is in the Equality Act, and I've tried to simplify it as much as I'm able to make it as accessible as possible but obviously by simplifying, there may be slight nuances that have been missed out. Rennie says, even now, I don't like the label disability, but it's shorthand for others. So we've got one person thinks dyslexia, dyspraxia, people think autism is, ADHD, none of above. Believe it or not, none of these are officially covered. None of them. What? What are you saying, Nat? No, honestly, none of these are officially defined as disabilities under the Equality Act, because the Act is rather vague in a lot of places. So if it isn't officially a disability under the Equality Act, remember we're talking about the Equality Act here, how can you be covered for it? Well, thankfully, there is a little sub thing, and in the government statutory guidance of the Equality Act, there's this little bit which says a disability can arise from a wide range of impairments which can be developmental, such as ASD, dyslexia, and dyspraxia. So this is kind of like an add-on for like civil servants and things. So you can't quote this directly, but it does say that in other elements it is recognised. The most important thing you need to realise though is a tribunal. So that's essentially when it goes to court and things are decided. And if you can quote different tribunals, like this, in this instances this happened, or in this instance that happened, you stand a very good base for being able to say, I am covered under the Equality Act. And thankfully, dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, dyscalculia, all of those ones have positively been recognised as a disability under different tribunals. So the fact is, it is very likely that you are covered. Likely is a key word here, because it isn't like a given, which is something which really surprised me. The next question I have is, should employers know or should have known about a person's disability? So some says yes, some says in some instances. I hope you appreciate the Cookie Monster there. The answer is should an employer know about a person's disability? Yes. And in some instances. Say, if the employer's like, well, I never knew about the disability, well, they're in the wrong, because there comes a point where in certain instances they should have that awareness, they should know. It's hard to apply this to neurodiversity, but let's say someone rolls up in a wheelchair and they never mention they're disabled. Well, the employer should know, and you can make an argument for neurodiversity, though it can be a bit more difficult. It's not always the case though. However, if you tell them, then it's an easy win. You're more or less covered. So it's in your interest to say that you have a disability. If you don't say it, it's going to be an uphill battle, but if you say it, you'll find life a lot easier should anything negative happen. Elena says, a manager can't know if the individual doesn't tell them for the invisible conditions. It's true in a way, but you are still liable in the UK. And that's why it's your responsibility to create an atmosphere where people feel open to disclose and there's an opportunity. So an example is, say you have a form and it says, do you consider yourself? If the person ticks no, you're covered, near enough. But if they click yes and then you do nothing, it doesn't matter. So with all these things, there's always going to be instances where it's not as straightforward, but you get the idea where if you're the person who is neurodiverse, tell. And if you're the employer, do your absolute best to create an environment where people feel able to speak about it, or there are at least opportunities where they can disclose should they wish. Rennie says, at what stage would you advocate disclosure? That's a really good question, and I think it's such a personal one. I mean, I think once you've done your research, I normally do it in the interview stage, but I make sure I word it as a positive. So in an instance like, what's your greatest weakness? Well, some may say dyslexia. However, my dyslexia has allowed me to think outside of the box, blah, blah, blah. That's normally where I kind of slot it in, but it really is different for everyone. So, proof. If you were asked to provide proof that you have a disability, what would you do? And this is the thing. An employer can say, or like can say, I don't believe you. I'm not so sure about this disability. I need to see proof. That's within their rights as well. So try not to get offended. An employer can ask for it. But what can count as proof? Is it this guy or is it something else? If you were asked to provide proof that you have a disability, what would you do? And this can, remember how I said how the line of what's officially defined as a disability is very blurry. So proof could be very useful. So we've got they don't need proof, question mark. We've got a medical letter to find my dyslexia diagnosis letter from the early 1980s. Yeah, I can't find mine from the 90s. A diagnostic report. I think a psyphysician or a medical doctor's note would be sufficient. They might require an official diagnosis, which is expensive for autism. I would find my certificate that says I have ASD and provide it to them, a letter from the GP. Brilliant. So all of these are really good suggestions. I'd ask them what they'd like to see. Thanks, April. You always get my sub references that this is Proof, who, yeah, he was a rapper in D12. Do you need proof? Yes. No. Maybe. If you have proof, like, say, an official diagnostic report, perfect. Nice and easy. But you don't actually need proof to get covered. It's one of those lines which is, as long as you can get an official opinion, you're normally okay. So let's say you've had support through access to work, or you've seen exceptional individuals, or you've had like a clinical report, or in your workplace you were treated for it, or a doctor like has written you a note. As long as it's from a respected source, you normally have a very good grounds. If the source is not recognized, then if it was to go to court, then that's when they might probe a little deeper and see, does this statement of characteristics, does it hold up? But the answer is, do you need proof? Not always. However, if you're able to get it, even if it's not an official diagnosis, even if it's something a little bit softer, that is still going to make everyone's life a lot easier. So what does the Equality Act not give us rights for? It's not perfect, and there are some things that are not covered. So are you protected against dual discrimination, so multiple neurodiversities, harassment, victimization, or reasonable adjustments? Which one of these do you think that you are not covered for?
Sorry, Nat, I don't really understand what you mean by dual discrimination.
Okay, so say if you know about comorbidity or co-occurring conditions, so if you have dyslexia and dyspraxia, or if you are a woman, which is a protected characteristic, and a Muslim, that's religion, so you've got two protected characteristics, and someone discriminates against you for being a Muslim woman even though they wouldn't discriminate against a Muslim man. Or with neurodiversity, it might be that you have autism and ADHD. So
So,
that's what I mean.
so it, I'm thinking like top trumps does being a woman trump having autism. Is that what you're suggesting? So they say
Exactly.
we don't discriminate against your disability because we're already making accommodations because you're female.
Yeah. A lot of the time, people don't recognize autism in women, for example.
Okay,
And are they discriminating against you because you're a woman, or are they discriminating against you because you've got autism?
that's explained it really clearly. Thank you very much, Nat.
No worry. Well, as it happens, that is the one that you are not covered for, and there is a movement to try and change that. So harassment, victimization, reasonable adjustments, all covered. But if you've got dual, so multiple, you can't do a thing for both. So you can't like sue someone or do a claim and say I was discriminated against because I am a woman with autism or because I've got dyslexia and dyspraxia. You kind of have to pick one at the moment. And that means that you might have to do multiple claims. So one claim for sexism and one claim for disability discrimination. That is something which is good to know, and it's something which a lot of advocates thinks needs to change. But again, interesting to know. So, what does the law? Here's some key takeaways. I'm doing my best to break this down, but just like Ronnie, if any of you want any clarifications, do let me know, because I appreciate this is a really complex subject. And unlike most of my presentations, this one was a little bit harder to make funner because it is a serious matter. So first of all, you have the right to identify as disabled as you see fit. If you do not consider yourself disabled, you do not have to say it. There's no law that says, you can't lie about that. It's what you personally resonate with. However, be cautious about statements like, I do not consider myself disabled, because a hostile employer could quote that, and that could make your life a bit dodgy. Most of the reasons why claims have been thrown out is there has been evidence, whether it's written or otherwise, which have stated the individual has said, I'm not disabled. So the employer didn't have any need to make any adjustments or along those lines. The next one is no neurodiverse condition is defined as a disability under the Equality Act 2010. If you do not believe me, look it up. But neurodivergents are very likely to meet the legal definition of disability due to past tribunals. A tribunal is like a hearing. In some instances, an employer is expected to know about a person's disability. Yet, if an employer disputes that a person has a disability, proof falls on you. And I think that's a really key line here. The proof falls on you. It is not up to the employer to prove that. They do not have to get you a diagnosis. They do not have to do any expenses. That would fall very much on you. So Rachel says, weirdly enough, we were asked to disclose our disabilities, gender, etc. at work recently if we chose to, and we could only select one disability, not multiple. And I wondered how it fed into the general thinking if you have one and you couldn't have another. Well, now you know. So what is about a little bit of history for the Equality Act? And again, I hope this is relevant to some of you who aren't in the UK. I'll do my best to keep it general, but this is more of a focus session. So the Equality Act it's had its 10th birthday recently, just last year. Woo, yay! And it did a good job. It's been a decent act on the whole, not perfect. The original one was 1995, and essentially we had lots of different acts all over the place. And so you had one for disability, one for race, all for the different characteristics. And then they kind of joined it together. In 2005, they did do like an updated Disability Act, but 2010 is the current one that we're using today. So it hasn't been updated in quite some time now, and this is why there is calls to reevaluate it and include dual diagnosis or discriminations. Now, these are the characteristics which are protected under the Act. So remember, it's not just about disability, it's any of these which are discriminated against. Are there any of these that you also resonate with? So, for instance, age. Has anyone ever harassed you because you're too young or too old? Disability. Do you have a physical impairment of some sort? Gender reassignment. Did you used to be a different gender to the one you were born in? Race, religion, sex, orientation, pregnancy, civil. All of these are covered. So a lot of the things I'm mentioning today do overlap with a lot of these, even though I'm going to be narrowing down on neurodiversity. Rachel says, what pushed me to get diagnosed was work was pushing me and getting angry at me for mistakes, and it was affecting my mental health. And that is some of the ways. I'm not going to encourage any of you that to go off and get a diagnosis if you don't have anything official. But all I'm saying is at least have something, even if it's like building up a case for yourself can make life easier. Moving forward, how do you even define a disability? What is a disability? And this comes in useful when you're trying to get support. And I hope you appreciate this GIF. I thought it was brilliant. And I like it because what people would normally write as disability might be different to how you personally see it.
How I define disability is someone who's not mentally able to function normally, whether they're severely impaired or slightly impaired.
I like. Thanks, Fozana. I think your word there is substantially, or you focused on the severity, which is really important, and that is a crucial thing when it comes to defining disability. We've also got disability is having a condition or conditions that interfere with the ability to operate in a normal abled way. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good one. BBG, anything that defers me from doing what I want to do. Nice. Well, I would say money is also it then. Anything that defers me. We've got being a diverse from what the general population finds normal, a characteristic that makes an active sustainability more challenging than it does for the majority of individuals. Yeah, I think all of you are correct, and everyone has their own definition. Some people see it as a very debilitating thing, other people see it as a very empowering thing. And your definition can change. And remember what we said about whether or not you consider yourself disabled. For the purpose of the Equality Act, sometimes you have to put those views and opinions on the side just because the law likes to be as black and white as it can be, though obviously it isn't all the time. A developmental disability that limits and interferes with the world around me. If I could benefit, for example, hyperlexia makes it easy to read quicker and learn foreign languages. So it can benefit. Interesting word. Again, if you're using the Equality Act, that you might need to be careful with that. So officially, under the Equality Act in Section 6, they describe it as a disability is a physical or mental impairment that has a substantial and long-term adverse effect on a person's ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. And so when you question it, again, this is all it says. It doesn't go on to details about autism, etc. But if you apply your condition or your way of thinking to this definition, if it aligns with that and you can prove it, then you are most likely covered. So a disability, a physical or mental, so we'd be mental impairment. If you think of it as a pure strength, you might not be covered. But if you appreciate there's challenges as well as strengths, then you probably are. That has a substantial, that's the other key word here. Does it interfere with your life? Some people would argue that dyslexia isn't substantial, where for others, it can really impede on their day-to-day life. Autism is more likely to get substantial. Long term, what do we mean by long term? How long is a piece of string? Well, the piece of string in this case is 12 months. Have you had the condition for 12 months or longer? Well, if you are neurodiverse, it's a lifelong condition, so you kind of got that covered. And carry out a day-to-day job. So as we mentioned, if you live in a neurotypical world, it's going to impede on your day-to-day life. So under this definition, it is covered, most likely. So these are the aspects, and it's great. So each aspect of the definition must be met. If you don't meet one of them, you're really going to struggle to be able to use the Equality Act effectively. So can you prove you have a disability for at least 12 months? If you can, great. Has it had a substantial effect on your life? Can you prove it? Great. Conditions that has been recognised as disability by past tribunals. This, when it gets a bit trickier, for all the main neurodiversities, all the key ones that you've heard of, to the best of my knowledge, they've all been proven. But this is when you might need to get, a lawyer or a solicitor, or, someone who is qualified to kind of go through the records and find previous cases. But you can also do your own research. If you've got something a little bit niche, I can't say, but for instance, say if you've got dyslexia, dyscalculia is a different condition, but also quite connected. So sometimes you can come at that angle. And the last one is, my employer has not made any reasonable adjustments. Can you prove that? Because if they've tried their damnedest and, did everything in their power and you're still struggling, you might not have a case either. That one might be a little bit harder to show. So reasonable adjustments. What counts as a reasonable adjustment? So here it says, has your employer actually made a reasonable adjustment to support you?
Sorry to interrupt. There's a question I asked, but the previous slide you showed, it said about if tribunals have recognised as disabilities by past tribunals. It doesn't make sense. A disability is a disability. They have to recognise it and accept it. What does that mean? I'm a bit confused about that one.
So again, the Equality Act doesn't go into detail on every single recognised disability. And normally you have to see like previous cases, let's say someone did a case saying, oh, I was discriminated against because of my Tourette's. has there been a previous case which says a similar thing and had won? So that's what we mean, like a previous example. Going on to like, oh, sorry, did that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, sorry, yeah.
Great. So for adjustments, it's really important to know that normally if you are being discriminated against, it's normally because the employer didn't do enough to help you overcome these challenges. But how far is reasonable? Reasonable is a really interesting word. And not everyone is applicable to receive reasonable adjustments. So on this, do you think are workers allowed, are job applicants allowed, or are volunteers allowed reasonable adjustments? And interestingly, the answer is workers and applicants are all entitled to reasonable adjustments and volunteers are not. Why? Why aren't volunteers allowed? Well, it's simple. According to them, volunteers, if they do not like the employer, they are fully able to leave and find another place to volunteer. But couldn't you say the same about workers and job applicants? Maybe, but the key difference is that as a worker, that's your livelihood. If someone's discriminating against you, of course you could get up and leave, but then you'd be at a severe disadvantage because you wouldn't be able to like afford life. So that's why it's workers and job applicants and not volunteers. So unfortunately, if you're a volunteer and you feel you're being discriminated against, you can definitely get support and help, but more often than not, you might not be covered with the same rights. And it says, I'm going to do a PGE, teaching qualification. Would I be a worker on placement? Typically, if you're getting paid, then you would count. But again, everyone, I really can't stress this enough. I am not a lawyer, so please do not take my advice as gospel. Next question is, what do you think would count as a disadvantage at work? So a reasonable adjustment is that an employer has done something to overcome a disadvantage. Now, what counts as a disadvantage? You'll start noticing we're really getting nitpicky on words here because words are really important when it comes to these sorts of things. We've got not being able to read as quickly as your peers. So that's a really good one. You've compared your ability to that of a comparable peer. If you said, I don't read as quick as someone at NASA, well, if you work in B&Q, it's not very comparable. So that's a really good answer. Taking longer to process information or instructions? To who? Who are you comparing against? No assistive tech available? Well, is it just you, or do other people have access to tech? Are you personally being discriminated against because you're not allowed tech but others are, or is no one allowed tech? And are no one allowed tech because the boss is stingy and mean, or is it because they genuinely can't afford it? Making mistakes, need time and patience, understanding, needing to withdraw occasionally when things get overwhelming, needing instructions repeated, something that reduces your performance, not being able to deal with change on the spot, for example, being told to work at a different location. So all of these are really great examples of disadvantages, but I must say that my favorite one here is the first one, and that's just because you've got to do it to your peers. Like this picture of the monkey trying to get a banana, yeah, he's at a disadvantage, but if that monkey can't also get it, then it's harder to compare. But if you have someone who has a bigger arm and can get the banana, and that is the only way you're feeding your monkey's bananas, disadvantage. Sorry, that was a very messy analogy, but hopefully some of you got that. So there is no single definition on what is reasonable. It's one of those grey areas. But here are some factors. So effectiveness of a proposed adjustment at removing a disadvantage. So if someone was to do something that you've asked, how effective would it be? If you ask them to do something like, okay, I really need a Mac in order to do this work, and you're like, no, that's ridiculous, just get something cheaper, then it wouldn't count. Health and safety concerns. If you are, let's say there's an example in a restaurant and your job is to check the temperature of like chicken in a freezer and you can't read the form because you can't do that mathematics because you're dyscalculic. Well, in that instance, you wouldn't have a leg to stand on typically because that is crucial to the health and safety. So typically health and safety trumps reasonable adjustments typically. But if you're in an instance where they could get you a device and it's not going to have any adverse effects on the overall safety, then it's normally okay. The practicality of making an adjustment, is it absolutely practical? Like imagine you want a ramp in a building, but the building's like really old and it just isn't possible. Like you would have to completely destroy something to make it happen. Or maybe you're in a small office, like open planned, and the feasibility of giving you your own office just isn't possible. That's another example. Affordability, but there is a bit of a caveat there because the UK government at least has a grant available through the Access to Work scheme, which can normally help employees afford these sorts of things. And potential disruption. If, for instance, you were allowed to use voice software to dictate your words, but you had to do it in the middle of the office and it put everyone else at a disadvantage, then that wouldn't be reasonable. So it's really important to ask yourself, is this reasonable? Essentially, is this going to cause harm or mega inconvenience to anyone else? So Rachel says, I mentioned this at my work that there is no disabled access, and they said no one who works here needs it, so we won't budget for it. That's a tough one because you could easily argue that, well, of course there's no one disabled here because they see the organization and they do not want to work for it. It is a tough one. Now, I want to ask you, what is a reasonable adjustment that has worked for you in the past? So what is the type of things that you can actually ask for that the employer is more than likely to say yes, or if they didn't say yes, they would be in breach of the Equality Act? So anything that you've had which has helped you in the past that you have asked or been given and it's, no trouble. So working from home, great one. Additional breaks, change of hours. I like that they're soft ones. Practice and honesty. See, these are really easy to implement and they're not going to harm anyone else. So say if an employer is not letting you work from home and it benefits you working from home, and you working from home doesn't stop you from doing your job, why not? But let's say your job is, I don't know, serving food. You can't really work from home. So it depends on the circumstances. There's also equipment, so like headphones, different like trans paper, quiet spaces, read to write software, extreme spelling. These are all things which are affordable, practical, easy to implement, and offer high return. And that's another thing, like how beneficial is it? We've got screens around my desk. Yes, exactly, like having like monitors all over the place. So these are just some adjustments that are typically given. So if you think any of these would benefit from you and you are neurodiverse and can prove it to a reasonable extent, then you are normally within your right to request these. And if they are able to afford it, this is when access to work comes in. So removing inappropriate noise, lighting, speech software, types of keyboard, different chairs. Some good examples is for ADHD, you might have structured breaks into long meetings. Again, very reasonable. Providing a second computer screen. Nice, very reasonable. If you can't afford it, well, the government can help pay for that. Dyspraxia, varying a dress code. Autism, agreeing to a later start and finishing time to avoid the rush hour. Again, doesn't matter. Like, if your job requires you to interact with your colleagues, as long as there's a solid period of time where you're able to interact, there's normally room for flexibility. You'll get the idea that a lot of this does become a little bit grey, and in an ideal world, an employee would just do it rather than having to like get official recommendations. Obviously, we don't live in a perfect world. Can you ask for adjustments in job interview, Nadina? Yes, you can. You are absolutely allowed to ask for recommendations. Can I confirm that you will not receive any sort of discrimination or bias because of it? No, I can't. But there are lots of employers which state in advance, is there any adjustments that you would like? This could be questions in advance. This could be knowing how many people are in the room. It could be having things printed larger. A lot of the time, if you know what you're asking for, it's a lot easier than just saying, I need help. So a quick summary on those, what we have covered is that neurodivergence, forget what I said, it is covered. For better or worse, it's very likely that you are covered. But now you know a little bit more detail about why it's likely and not guaranteed. The Equality Act has got your back for reasonable adjustments, so have they been made, protecting you against discrimination, harassment, and victimization. I will be going into those terms a little bit deeper in the next workshop, so that's why I haven't really dived in deep. If an employer disputes that you have a disability, the proof falls on you. You have to be the one to get proof. And as a lot of you may know, easier said than done. So I think it's better to have some sort of proof in advance of any challenges, just so you have it lying around. Or if you have like your thing and it's like buried in a cupboard from the 80s, maybe photocopy it, have a version available. A disability is long term, so having a cold isn't going to cut it. And it's got to have a substantial effect on you. If you have like a mole on your face, that's not a disability, it's not affecting you. Employer is only obliged to make adjustments if it know or should have known about a disability. The should have known is a bit of a rough area, so just go with they should have known. But if you didn't tell them directly, or there's a mitigating circumstances, you might still be able to use the Equality Act. If an employer is genuinely unable to fund an assessment or an adjustment, access to work scheme can be used. I'll be honest with you, all employers use it, even ones that could definitely afford it, but it's definitely one of the government's best kept secrets. Unfortunately, this is only available in the UK, but if you think it applies to you, definitely get in touch with us. Wow, that's a lot to cover today, and a lot. So just one last disclaimer to make it crystal clear. Anything said today is for the presentation and is for educational purposes only. I am not a lawyer, but what I have said has come directly from the Equality Act, and you can get it just by Googling it and going on the government's website. And if you've really found that enjoyable, we have the follow-up workshop in 2 weeks' time. We've got a different workshop next week. And this one is about disability discrimination. So this is going to go into what exactly is discrimination. And, we talked about harassment, victimization, going into them a little bit more detail. So think of today as an introduction to the Equality Act, and this is more examples like, okay, how does this apply in the real world? And that's Tuesday the 16th. So, and you can do that just on our Eventbrite or however you signed up today. And this is the thing, if any of you would like an assessment.
Sorry, I thought it's Thursday 16th, not Tuesday, it is.
Oh, do you know what? I'm heavily dyslexic. It's whatever the Eventbrite says. If any of you would like any help with us, all you need is a job or a upcoming job. We'll do an assessment for you. It takes about an hour. We'll help apply for the grant and get you training. Even though our assessments are not an official diagnosis, it's still typically more than enough proof in order to get extra likelihood of being covered under the Equality Act. So even if you feel that, I'm doing completely fine in my job, I'm not overly struggling, I still think it's recommended, not from me, but in general, to investigate it, to learn more. Sorry, I've got to be very careful. I cannot recommend anything, but that is definitely an option for you. So any other questions, and I'll do my best to answer them to the best of my knowledge. So Georgia says, do you cover all areas of the UK? Absolutely, apart from Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland has a slightly different process, but Scotland, Wales, we completely cover, and we can do our assessments online, so you do not have to meet us face to face. Thanks very much. This has been very helpful on all sorts of levels. I'm really glad. Can you explain a bit more about how the assessment works? Nadina, absolutely. So what it is you can go on our website and you go for in-work support. And all you do, you fill out a few details, your name, your type of your employment status, whether you're self-employed or you work at a company. Not too many details, it's pretty easy. But if you can't do it, just give us a call and we can do it over the phone. Then we'll arrange for an hour. And in that hour, we just talk about your job, about how your mind works, what you find easy, what you find hard. It's a very, very casual chat. Then one of us team will go back and type it all up. They'll send it to you and you'll be like, okay, great, I agree with this. Apart from that bit, we will change it. Then we'll apply for the grant on your behalf. It goes to the government. This can take, I'll be honest with you, it can take like 3 months. It's not a fast process, but that's how long it takes. Then the government will come back and they'll say, okay, we agree to what you've written, which they typically do, and we'll offer like £4,500, and that money we will buy the equipment and then give you the equipment and then train you on the equipment. The great thing about it is that say if something doesn't work for you, you are allowed to go back and do it again or exchange or mix around. And every time you have a new job or a new role, you can also reapply, or if your circumstances change. It's definitely worth doing if you are eligible. April says she'll put a link in the YouTube description. Thank you. I have multiple disabilities that can interfere with work. How would you recommend handling the assessment process? So, for a workplace needs assessment, you can absolutely have multiple disabilities or conditions. If you're on about the assessment process, look at the benefit that you could potentially gain from each one and ask yourself which one would matter most. Because again, I don't like to this isn't really top trumps, but like autism you could argue is more severe than dyslexia. So if you're only going for one assessment, you might be more beneficial to have autism. That's a very dodgy line, to be fair, and to be honest, you've got to go with the one that has the most adverse effect on your day-to-day life. Okay, no, I think that's all good. Well, amazingly, we did really great today. But if any of you would like to get in touch with us, it's super easy. Just go to exceptionalindividuals.com. That's where you can sign up for an assessment. All our webinars are on there. I think next week it's Are You Neurodiverse or Not? And then we're looking at different examples. And the following week is our discrimination one. We deliver workshops every single week. We also have an academy coming up where if you're looking to get into the workplace but struggling due to your neurodiversity, you can get in touch with us and that's completely free to attend. Do check out our website for that, or just give us an email. I hope that has been useful. Deborah says, is there a membership for your charity for future webinars being put on a regular distribution list? No, we're not on any list at the moment, but our webinars are completely free on a Thursday, though we do corporate workshops as well. Super useful, brilliant. I hope you enjoyed and I hope you're able to gain something from today. It's been an interesting one. It's a tough subject, but even if you're able to learn a few little gems, which I know I definitely have, hopefully it's been a good use of your time. I'll see you all and hopefully see you in a week or 2 weeks' time.